All it takes is one moment, one relapse, one reckless choice, one final unforgivable act, for a legendary career to crumble into dust. Tonight, we peel back the glittering mask of R&B royalty and expose the exact moments when fame turned fatal. Imagine the king of soul, James Brown, roaring down the highway in a wild, high-speed police chase, or David Ruffin watching his legendary voice and career collapse after a cocaine arrest that shocked the nation. These aren't just scandals, they're the turning points that shattered lives, careers, and the very myths built around these icons. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see fame forever. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment. Which R&B legend do you think suffered the most devastating fall? Welcome to Gazeon. 1. Ike Turner. Ike Turner was a towering force in American music, a pioneer whose fingerprints lie at the birth of rock and roll. With the groundbreaking 1951 track Rocket 88, he helped ignite a new era, and when he joined with the incomparable Tina Turner, the Ike and Tina Turner Revue became one of the most explosive acts of the 1960s, a storm of rhythm, fire, and raw electricity. To the world, Ike was a genius at the peak of R&B power, but behind the curtain, a darker truth consumed him. By the late 1960s, cocaine addiction, paranoia, and a crushing need for control warped his success into domination. In the shadows of their shared fame, Tina Turner endured 16 years of torment, brutal beatings, psychological degradation, and even the infamous moment he burned her lip with a cigarette. She was no longer a partner, but a prisoner of his rage. Everything changed on a July night in 1976 at the Dallas Statler Hilton. After yet another violent assault, Tina fled, bloodied, terrified, and carrying only 36 cents. That desperate escape shattered Ike's empire. In 1981, Tina told her story publicly in People magazine. The world was stunned. Overnight, Ike Turner went from celebrated musician to condemned abuser. Radio stations banned his music. Labels severed ties. The industry abandoned him completely. His final decades were marked by addiction, arrests, and isolation. When Ike Turner died in 2007 at age 76, he was remembered not as a pioneer, but as a symbol of cruelty. His story stands as a haunting truth. No amount of musical genius can redeem a legacy destroyed by violence. 2. Sly Stone. Sly Stone, born Sylvester Stewart, wasn't just a musician, he was a seismic force who rewired American music. As the mastermind behind Sly and the Family Stone, he fused soul, rock, funk, and psychedelia into a revolutionary new sound. With anthems like Dance to the Music and Everyday People, he didn't just create hits, he sparked a movement. His influence echoes through every funk record that followed. But behind the explosive creativity, his life was collapsing. By the early 1970s, at the height of his fame, Sly Stone's world began to unravel. The pressures of superstardom, internal band conflict, and the chaos surrounding his fame pushed him into paranoia and self-destruction. He withdrew into a fortress-like mansion guarded by muscular bodyguards and filled with unregistered firearms. Cocaine became his most dangerous dependency. What began as a habit mutated into a consuming addiction costing thousands each week. His professionalism crumbled. Concerts started hours late, if he showed up at all. Fans who once worshipped him were left furious as shows dissolved into incoherent chaos. The breaking point came in December 1974. After responding to a disturbance, Los Angeles police searched Sly's car and found cocaine and an unregistered gun. The arrest shattered his public mystique. Rolling Stone and the Los Angeles Times exposed everything: the addiction, the paranoia, the weapons, the downfall. The consequences were swift. Promoters fled. Epic Records severed ties. The Family Stone fractured beyond repair. The man who helped invent funk stood in the ruins of his own making. Sally Stone's story endures as a sorrowful reminder of how brilliance can collapse under the crushing weight of excess and addiction. In the grand story of R&B history, Hank Ballard stands as one of its boldest pioneers, a firestarter whose music rattled the 1950s and opened the door to a new era of sonic rebellion. As the charismatic frontman of Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, he burst onto the scene in 1954 with Work With Me, Annie, a song so provocative it was banned from radio, condemned by moral leaders, and adored by every teenager craving danger in their music. Ballard didn't just push boundaries, he shattered them. But the moment that should have crowned him a legend instead became the deepest wound of his life. In 1959, he wrote and performed The Twist, a song destined to transform dance culture forever, but fate intervened. When Chubby Checker released his cover, the song exploded into a global phenomenon. Checker became a household name, Ballard. The song's true creator was pushed into the shadows. Watching another man rise on the back of his own innovation left Ballard with a resentment he never overcame. As the 1960s evolved and R&B shifted, Ballard began to spiral. The neon-lit nights of Detroit and New York became his refuge. Clubs where the music was loud, the highs were stronger, and escape felt close. Heroin became his constant companion, marijuana his daily ritual. Tours collapsed, recording sessions were missed, and King Records grew exhausted with his instability. Then came the breaking point. In early 1970, Detroit police pulled him over for a routine stop and discovered heroin, marijuana, and drug paraphernalia scattered in his car. The arrest hit Jet and Billboard with a shockwave. Within days, King Records cut ties, labeling him too troubled and too scandalous to salvage. Radio stations stopped spinning his songs. Concert bookings disappeared. A man who once shook America was swallowed by silence. When Hank Ballard died in 2003 at age 75, the world barely took notice. The original king of the twist, a trailblazer of brilliance, rebellion, and innovation, was ultimately overshadowed by addiction, bitterness, and a single devastating arrest that sealed his fall from grace. 4. Etta James. Etta James possessed a voice that didn't just fill a room, it dominated it. Fierce, aching, and impossibly soulful, her vocals could silence entire audiences. In the 1960s, she wasn't simply a singer, she was a phenomenon. At last became the eternal anthem of romance, while Tell Mama revealed a grit that no one could rival. With every note, she carved herself into the foundation of R&B, adored by millions who believed she was untouchable. But behind the spotlight lived a woman drowning in pain. James battled addiction for decades, a relentless storm fueled by loneliness, trauma, and the need to quiet her inner chaos. By 1974, at just 36, the once fearless diva was worn down by dependency and emotional turmoil. The world saw glamour, she lived in despair. The breaking point came without mercy. Los Angeles police raided her location in a dramatic sweep that felt like the end of an era. Inside her car, officers found heroin, marijuana, and used syringes, grim symbols of a legend in freefall. Photographers captured the entire arrest. Within hours, Rolling Stone and Ebony blasted the headline, R&B Queen Falls in the Heart of LA. The collapse was swift. A judge ordered her to the Tarzana Treatment Center. Chess Records cut ties immediately. Promoters blacklisted her. The industry that once worshipped her voice now saw only scandal and liability. Stages went dark. The hits stopped. Etta James, the powerhouse who once shook the nation, was pushed into financial struggle and emotional isolation, left to rebuild her life far from the spotlight. Her story endures as a painful reminder of how addiction destroys brilliance and how quickly the music world turns away when its icons fall. 5. Jackie Wilson. Jackie Wilson was an explosion of talent, a dazzling force whose voice, charisma, and electric stage presence redefined what black artists could achieve in mainstream pop. He didn't just sing, he ignited the stage, inspiring generations to come. But behind the brilliance was a man slowly collapsing under the weight of his own destructive habits. Years of heavy drinking, chain smoking, chaotic eating, and emotional turmoil, especially after a painful divorce, tore at his health. Yet the pressure to remain iconic, even as younger stars emerged, pushed him past human limits. The breaking point arrived on September 25, 1975, at the Latin Casino in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Over 2,000 fans filled the venue to see Mr. Excitement in his glory, but at just 41, he was running on fumes. As the band played Lonely Teardrops, Jackie reached for one last unforgettable moment. He belted out, "My heart is crying," and suddenly collapsed, his head hitting the stage with brutal force. The crowd froze. The lights still burned, but the room fell silent. Rushed to the hospital, Jackie was diagnosed with a massive stroke. He never regained consciousness. For 9 years he remained in a coma, forgotten by labels, abandoned by the industry, and slowly fading from public memory. When he died in 1984, his once brilliant legacy had dimmed, overshadowed by tragedy. Jackie Wilson's story is a wrenching reminder that sometimes a legendary career doesn't fade away. It ends in a single devastating moment under the same spotlight that once made a man immortal. 6. Frankie Lymon. Frankie Lymon wasn't just a singer, he was a miracle. A child prodigy whose angelic high notes captured the innocence and excitement of early rock and roll. As the golden-voiced frontman of the Teenagers, he soared to fame with Why Do Fools Fall in Love, turning a 13-year-old kid from Harlem into America's brightest new sensation. But behind that meteoric rise was a fragile young life collapsing under pressures no child should face. At the peak of his fame, Frankie was exploited by record companies, manipulated by managers, and confronted by a racist industry that drained him emotionally and financially. Searching for escape, he fell into heroin addiction at just 15. What began as a momentary relief became a trap he couldn't escape. By the early 1960s, the Teenagers had split, and Frankie's solo career spiraled into a string of forgettable releases. His money vanished into a habit costing hundreds each week. His life dissolved into all-night parties, missed sessions, violent arguments with his wife Elizabeth Waters, and desperate choices that pushed him further into darkness. The breaking point came in 1966. During a police raid in Harlem, officers found the 24-year-old Lymon drunk, erratic, and carrying heroin, marijuana, and syringes. Headlines were merciless. Teen idol Frankie Lymon caught in drugs. Labels dropped him. Promoters vanished. The industry that once adored him turned its back. 2 years later, in 1968, Frankie Lymon died at just 25. His story remains one of music's most heartbreaking cautionary tales, a brilliant prodigy destroyed by addiction, exploitation, and the unbearable weight of fame far too young. 7. James Brown. James Brown was more than a superstar. He was a cultural earthquake, a titan who helped invent soul and funk, and a living emblem of black pride and power. With explosive anthems like Papa's Got a Brand New Bag and Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, he earned the immortal title the Godfather of Soul. On stage he was unstoppable, a whirlwind of sweat and fire no one could imitate. But by the late 1980s, his brilliance was dimming, replaced by addiction and spiraling loss of control. Brown had become heavily dependent on PCP, a drug notorious for hallucinations, paranoia, and violent behavior. His habit cost thousands each week and ignited chaos in his personal life. The man who once preached empowerment was now battling demons stronger than fame. The breaking point came on September 24, 1988. High and paranoid after believing someone used a bathroom near his office, Brown snapped. He stormed into a nearby insurance seminar with a shotgun, shouting at terrified attendees. When police arrived, he fled, launching one of the most chaotic high-speed chases in music history, tearing across 2 states before officers shot out his truck's tires. Dragged from the vehicle as cameras rolled, James Brown, the godfather of soul, was handcuffed on live television. The nation was stunned. Consequences were immediate. Brown was sentenced to 6 years, serving 2. Promoters backed away. Radio stations muted his music, shows vanished. One drug-fueled morning shattered decades of glory. James Brown's downfall remains a stark reminder that even the greatest icons can fall, instantly, violently, and completely, in a single moment of chaos. 8. Wilson Pickett. Wilson Pickett, the legendary Wicked Pickett, wasn't just a singer, he was a storm, a thunderbolt of raw energy whose hits in the Midnight Hour and Mustang Sally shook the foundations of R&B. With a voice fierce enough to rattle the walls, Pickett broke barriers, united audiences, and became a global powerhouse defined by fire, force, and fearless authenticity. But the same intensity that fueled his brilliance eventually sparked his downfall. By the 1970s, America's musical landscape was shifting. Disco and funk were rising. Pickett, under pressure to stay relevant while battling personal turmoil, divorce, management conflicts, and relentless touring, spiraled into addiction. Alcohol and cocaine became his escape. Nights blurred into chaotic parties from Detroit to New York. Anger and volatility followed him everywhere. Friends kept their distance. Colleagues feared his moods. Bar fights and public confrontations turned his fame into a fragile flame. Then came the moment that destroyed everything. On October 15, 1987, in a packed Englewood, New Jersey bar, a heavily intoxicated Pickett snapped. In a drunken rage, he smashed a beer bottle over a man's head, causing serious injury. Police arrived and found cocaine in his pocket. The arrest was immediate, and the humiliation national. The New York Times, Jet, and countless outlets condemned him as violent and self-destructive. Fans were stunned. A legend had become a liability. Atlantic Records cut ties at once. Promoters canceled shows. Audiences stepped back, shaken by the reality behind the legendary voice. Pickett's career collapsed from superstardom to near obscurity. No new hits followed. His final years were spent performing small, quiet gigs, a haunting contrast to the arenas he once commanded. When he died in 2006 at 64, he left behind a legacy both brilliant and tragic, a reminder that even the greatest talents can fall hardest when their inner demons go unchecked. 9. David Ruffin. David Ruffin wasn't just another voice in R&B, he was thunder. As the magnetic lead singer of The Temptations, he delivered immortal classics like My Girl and Ain't Too Proud to Beg, with a soul so powerful it felt heaven-sent. Rising from brutal poverty in Mississippi, he fought his way into the spotlight through pure, explosive talent. For a brief moment, he stood at the peak of black music, adored, unstoppable, iconic. But the same fame that crowned him soon destroyed him. By the mid-1960s, Ruffin had fallen into a dangerous spiral. Cocaine became his escape from the crushing weight of superstardom. As Temptations hits earned huge profits, Ruffin lived wildly. Thousands vanished into marathon parties from Detroit to Los Angeles, nights of excess, ego, and escalating chaos. Success fed his pride, and pride fed his downfall. He became notoriously demanding, insisting on his own limousine, skipping shows, and clashing bitterly with Motown executives and bandmates. Fights erupted. Tensions hardened. The Temptations were breaking apart. Then came the breaking point. In June 1968, Detroit police stopped Ruffin and found cocaine and marijuana hidden in his car. The arrest was immediate and catastrophic. Jet and the Detroit Free Press blasted the scandal across the nation. At the same time the Temptations reached their limit, Ruffin was fired after demanding top billing and abandoning a major show in Cleveland. The industry recoiled. Motown withdrew support. Promoters backed away. Fans watched their hero collapse under his own choices. David Ruffin never regained his former glory. His solo run flickered instead of soared, leaving behind a legacy dimmed by tragedy, a reminder that even extraordinary gifts can shatter when ego and addiction collide. 10. Bobby Womack. Bobby Womack possessed a voice that cut straight to the soul, raw, wounded, unforgettable. With Looking for a Love and his early success with the Womack brothers, he seemed destined for greatness. Even more, he had the mentorship of Sam Cooke, one of music's most important figures. Under Cooke's guidance, Womack appeared ready to become a generational R&B force. But one shocking decision destroyed that future forever. In December 1964, Sam Cooke died tragically, leaving the black music community grieving. Just 3 months later, the 21-year-old Womack stunned the world by marrying Barbara Cooke, Sam's widow. What he saw as emotional connection was widely viewed as betrayal. In an industry built on reverence for the dead, the union was considered unforgivable. Jet and Ebony amplified the backlash, painting the marriage as predatory and opportunistic. Fans fiercely loyal to Sam Cooke attacked Womack at concerts, throwing objects and shouting him off stage. The supportive R&B community that once embraced him turned away completely. Recording deals collapsed, shows became chaotic, his name became toxic. As his career crumbled, Womack's personal life spiraled further. Allegations of domestic violence, growing cocaine use, and even an alleged affair with his teenage stepdaughter deepened the public outrage, turning temporary backlash into permanent exile. Bobby Womack's once promising future dissolved almost overnight. His story remains one of R&B's most haunting lessons in a community built on loyalty and respect. A single perceived betrayal can erase even the most extraordinary talent forever. 1. Rick James. Rick James wasn't just a star. He was a phenomenon, the wild, unapologetic king of funk. With Super Freak, he didn't just create a hit, he ignited a cultural explosion. His persona was larger than life. Silk robes, endless parties, countless women, and a mansion built for excess. But by the mid-1980s, the glitter had decayed. Beneath the bravado was a man spiraling into oblivion, consumed by a cocaine addiction that destroyed his fortune, his sanity, and ultimately his freedom. What ended Rick James wasn't fading fame, it was darkness of his own making. The nightmare began in July 1991. James and his girlfriend abducted a young woman, holding her captive for 6 horrifying days of beatings, forced cocaine use, and sexual assault. Shockingly, it wasn't the only incident. A year later, he assaulted a music executive in another cocaine-fueled frenzy, revealing a violent pattern too extreme to ignore. Reckoning came on August 2, 1993. In a crowded Los Angeles courtroom, James was convicted of kidnapping, assault, and multiple drug charges. He received over 5 years in state prison. The media swarmed the case, exposing every disturbing detail. Outrage spread nationwide. Fans recoiled, and the music industry cut all ties. Radio stations erased his catalog overnight. The fall was absolute. When James was released in 1996, the world had moved on. The funk icon returned not to triumph, but to emptiness, a ruined career and a destroyed reputation. Comeback attempts flickered and died. In 2004, at 56, Rick James died from heart and lung failure, leaving behind a legacy forever scarred by violence and addiction. His story remains one of music's darkest cautionary tales, proof that even the brightest flame can be extinguished by the shadows it refuses to confront. 12. R. Kelly. For decades, R. Kelly reigned as the king of R&B, a hit-making force behind cultural landmarks like I Believe I Can Fly. His influence spanned continents, his voice felt untouchable, and millions believed they were witnessing musical greatness. But behind that shine lay one of the darkest criminal histories in modern entertainment. For years, rumors circulated young girls, predatory behavior, secret tapes, and an inner circle built to hide the truth. Wealth, fame, and power formed a fortress that protected him while unimaginable abuses continued in the shadows. That fortress collapsed in 2021. On September 29th, in a Brooklyn federal courtroom, the myth finally shattered. After a 6-week trial, R. Kelly was convicted in a sweeping case that exposed decades of cruelty. Survivors, many speaking publicly for the first time, described horrific abuse, racketeering, sexual exploitation, kidnapping, coercion, forced labor, and psychological terror. Evidence was overwhelming: tapes, diaries, recordings, and chilling testimony. The verdict shook the culture. Radio stations erased his catalog. Labels cut ties. Networks removed his videos. Fueled by surviving R. Kelly, the public reacted with outrage. Overnight, the superstar became a symbol of monstrous abuse. He was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, a punishment reflecting the scale and brutality of his crimes. His career didn't just fall, it was annihilated. Today, R. Kelly's legacy stands as a permanent warning. Power may hide evil for a time, but justice eventually breaks through, and no amount of talent can save a man from the consequences of the lives he destroyed. 13. Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway was not just a singer. He was a celestial force. His voice, raw and angelic, felt like it came from a world beyond our own. Emerging from a devout upbringing in St. Louis, he rose in the late 1960s and early 70s as one of soul music's greatest gifts. His interpretations of A Song for You and his legendary duets with Roberta Flack, especially the Grammy-winning Where Is the Love, placed him among the true giants of musical expression. For a moment, Donny Hathaway stood untouchable at the peak of soul. But behind that brilliance lived a tortured mind locked in a silent war. By the late 60s, Hathaway was consumed by severe bipolar disorder, a condition that tormented him with terrifying hallucinations and overwhelming paranoia. He heard voices warning of dangers that didn't exist. He became convinced the CIA or hostile white men were tracking him. His genius became a battlefield he could not escape. To calm the chaos, he turned to alcohol and barbiturates, sedatives that cost him hundreds of dollars a week. Pressure from Atco Records to keep touring and recording, combined with the weight of supporting his family, pushed him dangerously close to collapse. Performances suffered. Sessions fell apart. His relationships with managers and musicians became strained as his mind unraveled. The breaking point came in the summer of 1973. During the making of Extensions of a Man in Chicago, Hathaway snapped. Convinced the studio was bugged, he shouted about spies in the walls and smashed equipment in a panic. Horrified colleagues rushed him to a mental hospital, where doctors finally diagnosed his condition. News of the breakdown spread quickly. Ebony and the Chicago Tribune documented the tragedy. Fans were stunned to see their heavenly voiced idol drowning in darkness. The industry reacted coldly. Tours were canceled. Executives pulled away. Hathaway was labeled unstable and too risky. After 1973, no major hits followed. Donny Hathaway slowly disappeared from the spotlight, overwhelmed by mental illness and addiction, until his heartbreaking death in 1979. His story remains one of soul music's most devastating truths, a reminder that even the brightest brilliance can shatter when illness, pressure, and silence go unaddressed. 14. Chuck Woolery. Chuck Woolery, the magnetic frontman of the avant-garde, was once a rising spark in the shifting soundscape of the 1960s. With the hit Naturally Stoned, he captured the breezy spirit and optimism of a generation. Coming from humble Kentucky roots, Woolery carried charm, ambition, and clear musical promise, a young artist seemingly destined for long-term success. But the dream that once shone so brightly was shattered by one devastating moment, born entirely from his own self-destructive choices. By the late 1960s, Woolery had fallen into a lifestyle defined by constant parties and heavy drinking. What started as celebration hardened into dependency. The breaking point came in 1968. After an all-night party in Los Angeles, Woolery, drunk and exhausted, got behind the wheel of his Mustang. What followed was a nightmare. Speeding through a neighborhood at nearly 80 miles per hour, he swerved uncontrollably and crashed violently into a pole. The impact left him with serious head and leg injuries. Police soon confirmed what witnesses suspected: his blood alcohol level was dangerously high. The media reacted instantly. Headlines condemned him as reckless and irresponsible, another rising star lost to excess. Fans felt betrayed, and his label severed ties immediately. Overnight, Woolery's promising music career collapsed, replaced by a destroyed car, a damaged body, and a reputation in ruins. Though he later reinvented himself as a successful television host, that new path was completely separate from the musical future he once held. Chuck Woolery's potential as an R&B innovator was cut short by one disastrous night, proof that a single drunken decision can erase even the most promising artistic ascent in an instant. 15. Clyde McPhatter. Clyde McPhatter was one of the true architects of early R&B and rock and roll. A voice so pure and soaring it reshaped an entire era. As the founder of the Drifters, he lit up the charts with Money Honey, then built a powerful solo career with hits like A Lover's Question. His unmistakable tenor, full of emotion and vulnerability, became one of the most copied vocal styles of the 1950s. McPhatter wasn't just a star. He was a pioneer who shaped doo-wop, R&B, and the foundation of modern soul. But behind the acclaim was a painful truth. Clyde McPhatter was battling demons he could never escape. From the start, he faced exploitation, poor compensation, and the harsh racism of the era. The emotional toll was immense. As the pressure grew, alcohol became his escape, first as a relief, then as a consuming dependency. Everything collapsed in 1968. During a performance in New York, a visibly intoxicated McPhatter unraveled on stage, shouting at the audience and even his own band. Promoters removed him, and the incident made headlines. In the following months, his behavior worsened. He clashed with Mercury Records, refused sessions, and ultimately had his contract terminated. The press soon exposed the depth of his addiction. Reports revealed a man sinking into despair as alcoholism ravaged his health. The industry, eager for younger, more stable stars, abandoned him completely. Clyde McPhatter died in 1972 at just 39, alone, broke, and largely forgotten by the world he helped shape. His story remains a haunting reminder that even the brightest gifts can be extinguished when pain becomes unbearable and the bottle becomes the only refuge. 16. D'Angelo. D'Angelo didn't just enter R&B and neo-soul, he transformed them. With Brown Sugar and the iconic untitled How Does It Feel, he became an instant phenomenon. His velvet voice, sculpted physique, and magnetic mystique made him a sex symbol, while his artistry placed him among the most respected musicians of his era. For a moment, he seemed untouchable, a once-in-a-generation talent carrying the future of neo-soul. But the weight of that stardom began crushing him from within. As expectations skyrocketed, the pressure twisted into something toxic. Behind the flawless music, his life grew chaotic. Fame distorted his identity, his habits, and his sense of control. Slowly, D'Angelo slipped into a destructive spiral of addiction. The breaking point came on March 6, 2005. Driving erratically through Richmond, Virginia, he crashed into a fence. Police found cocaine and marijuana in the car. Intoxicated and resisting arrest, he was dragged from the wreckage, a shattering image that destroyed the polished aura he had built. It wasn't the first warning. A nearly fatal crash in 2002 had already left him physically and emotionally shaken. Instead of inspiring recovery, it pushed him deeper into decline. The prodigy, the world once celebrated, was visibly falling apart. Media outlets erupted. Fans felt betrayed. EMI backed away. Shows were canceled. Record deals evaporated. Almost overnight, D'Angelo disappeared into a long, painful exile, a 14-year silence that left a void in R&B. Though he has occasionally resurfaced, the full return of his genius remains uncertain. D'Angelo's story stands as a haunting reminder: when fame becomes a cage and pressure becomes poison, even the most revolutionary voice can fall silent. 17. Arthur Conley. Arthur Conley burst onto the music scene like a bolt of southern lightning, bold, bright, and impossible to ignore. With a gospel-shaped voice refined under the mentorship of Otis Redding, he embodied the spirit of sweet soul music. His 1967 smash hit didn't just top charts, it defined an era and marked him as one of R&B's most promising young stars. Gifted, charismatic, and guided by a legend, Conley seemed destined for lifelong success. But behind the glow of early fame, a devastating storm was forming. The sudden rise collided with Conley's private struggles. The tragic death of Otis Redding, the mentor he loved like family, shattered him. Overwhelmed by grief, pressure, and soaring expectations, he spiraled into emotional turmoil. Alcohol, cocaine, and marijuana became his constant escape, fueling a dangerous party lifestyle that quickly consumed his focus and stability. By 1970, at just 24, Conley was unraveling. His performances grew erratic. He slurred lyrics, missed cues, and clashed bitterly with his label, Atco. The press, once charmed by his youthful fire, now portrayed him as an uncontrollable addict. Fights, reckless choices, and financial chaos followed him. Fans who once cheered for him watched in disappointment as their rising star dimmed. Desperate to outrun his demons and the ruins of his career, Conley took drastic action. He disappeared from the U.S. entirely. He moved to the Netherlands and legally changed his name to Lee Roberts, attempting to bury both the pain and the past. From a rising icon, he faded into quiet obscurity, far from the stages that once defined him. When Arthur Conley died in 2003 at 57, the world had long forgotten the prodigy who once carried the promise of greatness, a tragic reminder of how grief and addiction can destroy even the brightest talent. 18.K-C Haley. K.C. Haley was a storm of vocal fire, the molten voice behind Jody's raw R&B revolution, and one half of the beloved duo K.C. and JoJo. With massive hits like All My Life, his soul-deep delivery and electrifying stage presence helped shape the sound of the 1990s. At his peak, K.C. stood among the most passionate and unmistakable voices in R&B. But behind the spotlight, pressure was quietly consuming him. As tensions within Jodeci grew and the demands of fame intensified, K.C. turned to alcohol and cocaine for relief. What started as a coping mechanism quickly hardened into addiction. The polished star fans adored began to unravel, his struggles bleeding into his performances. Everything came crashing down on May 8, 2000. During a Jodeci tour stop at the House of Blues in Los Angeles, K.C. took the stage visibly intoxicated, unstable, slurring, and out of control. In front of 1,500 fans, he stumbled through songs, missed notes, drifted off rhythm, and then, in a shocking moment, collapsed on stage. It wasn't random, it was the eruption of years of hidden turmoil. The fallout was swift and merciless. Footage of the collapse spread across television and early internet platforms, turning his private battle into a worldwide spectacle. Fans were devastated. The industry quickly pulled back, record deals vanished, tours were canceled, opportunities evaporated. The once dominant voice of R&B went silent. K.C. Haley's downfall became a painful example of how addiction, when exposed publicly, can destroy a career in seconds. His story endures as a stark reminder that in the age of instant media, one moment of collapse can overshadow years of brilliance. D.H. Harvey rose out of Chicago with unmistakable promise, a young R&B vocalist whose early work backing the legendary Patti LaBelle positioned him as one of the most exciting voices of the 1980s. With a rich, commanding tone and natural charisma, he seemed destined for lasting success in an increasingly competitive R&B landscape. For a brief moment, he stood on the edge of true stardom. But the higher he climbed, the faster his world began to crack. As new stars emerged and industry demands intensified, Harvey faced weak management, unstable guidance, and immense pressure. Instead of support, he turned to escape. What began as occasional indulgence slipped into dependency. The substances he used to cope soon controlled him, dragging him away from the career his talent promised. His unraveling became undeniable in 1987. During what should have been a routine police stop on Chicago's South Side, everything collapsed. Officers found cocaine and an open bottle of liquor inside his car. When confronted, Harvey lashed out, yelling and arguing, escalating the moment into a public spectacle that quickly hit the headlines. Local newspapers and Jet magazine exposed the troubling pattern: chaotic nights, cocaine use, heavy drinking, and a reputation for unreliability. The industry's patience ran out. Record labels cut ties, promoters removed him from their shows. Fans who once believed in him turned away in disappointment. Just like that, D.H. Harvey disappeared from major stages. Unable to overcome addiction, shifting market pressures, and his own destructive choices, he slipped into professional obscurity. He spent his remaining years far from the future once within reach, until his death in 2012 at just 47. His story endures as a stark reminder: one public moment born from private chaos can derail even the greatest promise. Gazeon possessed one of the most unmistakable voices in modern R&B, a deep, resonant baritone shaped by hardship and ambition. Rising from a tough upbringing in New Brunswick, New Jersey, he followed a classic rags-to-riches path. With timeless hits like Put That Woman First, he became one of the defining artists of the early 2000s, admired for both his grit and emotional depth. For years, he symbolized perseverance and promise. But behind the scenes, the pressures of fame, label conflicts, and rumors of personal struggles slowly chipped away at his once strong reputation. Yet the moment that ultimately destroyed his career had nothing to do with addiction, controversy, or public outbursts. Instead, it came from a scandal so disturbing and morally unforgivable that it wiped out his legacy in a single day. On September 9, 2021, police in Hillsborough, New Jersey arrived at Gazeon's home after reports of animal cruelty. What they discovered shocked the nation: 15 dogs in extreme states of neglect, starved, filthy, dehydrated, and confined in unsanitary conditions. 6 were locked in tight cages, and 1 was suffering so severely that officers had to euthanize it on the spot. Images released by authorities spread instantly on social media, triggering massive outrage and dominating headlines on TMZ, the New York Post, and other major outlets. The backlash was swift and absolute. Unlike drug arrests or reckless behavior, animal cruelty sparked a level of fury that allowed no path to redemption. Fans abandoned him overnight. Record labels and promoters cut all ties. Scheduled shows disappeared. His financial stability collapsed. Gazeon went from celebrated R&B star to cultural outcast within hours. His fall became a harsh reminder of modern celebrity. Talent can build a career, but a single moral failure, especially one involving helpless victims, can erase it forever. And that concludes our deep dive into 20 R&B legends whose careers collapsed in a single devastating moment. From Hank Ballard's heroin arrest to R. Kelly's final conviction, these stories reveal a painful truth: Talent alone can't survive when fame demands perfection, but offers no mercy. The pressure, the wealth, the spotlight, they can lift a star to greatness or push them straight into self-destruction. Now we are left with the hard questions. Does celebrity make these icons more vulnerable to ruin? Or is the industry simply faster to exile black talent once their flaws are exposed? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. If you want more truth behind the music, hit like, subscribe to Gazeon, and turn on notifications. The real stories of fame continue in our next video.